Hello and welcome back to Better Than Adventure. Last time we started building, and today, yeah, we're still building. Last time we left you off at a bit of a cliffhanger, so I'll reiterate on the stuff I did before. Basically, I was talking about specifically, if I wanted to do, like, a coherent scoring system for, like, retro older games, how would I do it? Because one issue which I've had for a while was that I felt that a lot of games got either... Basically, in retro gaming, games are either over or underappreciated, with basically no in between. And I wanted to talk about how I would want to fix that. I mentioned a comparison between Bubsy and Mario 64. I said that they were both, hugely influential games culturally, both of them, though one way more recently, and for the, wrong reasons. But even so, I think it's fair to mention both of them in this context. So what I want to specifically mention now is the fact that, well, what does it mean for a game to be bad? Because it's one of those things where different kinds of bad games can be completely different experiences. I think that one thing which can seriously help hurt a game is its difficulty. If a game is old, janky, and buggy and broken, but it's not very difficult, playing it can be more fun for the simple reason that, well, it's harder to just die in the game, so you can at least explore more of the game's systems before, your character kicks the bucket. Similarly, I think a common point in a lot of retro games is that the typically harder games are the ones that are seen, as games that aged worse. When, realistically, that's not really that related. Mario 64 was actually not a very difficult game, when we look at it today, but when it came out, because 3D gaming was so new, especially to, people who were on the, SNES and then went over to the N64, because they didn't have the PlayStation, it was really, kind of difficult to get to grips with a lot of the game's design. And what that resulted in was the game kind of having a difficulty that was, maybe today easy-ish, and back then not that difficult, but it was, like, quite easy compared to a lot of the other games that were out at the time. What you gotta realize is that a game's difficulty really does play an impact, and one of the biggest examples of, a game can be infamous because of its difficulty, even if it's not very good. Like, there are a lot of NES games that got big on the AVGN, even if the games themselves kinda suck, because they're hard. And that's kinda what made them notable. A lot of games that were on the, PS1 and earlier were actually harder if you played the Western versions. This was because in Japan, you couldn't rent games. It wasn't allowed. So what would happen is when a game was ported to the West, in order to make people play the game for long enough for where, you couldn't return the game, to GameStop or whatever, and finish it in a weekend, so people are more inclined to buy the game, games were made harder. Working Designs, a company that's kind of infamous for this, made games like Luna way harder. Thankfully, some French guy made a undub of the, if you want to play Luna, for instance, the best way to play it is kind of debated, But if you have the original, US if you have the original US release of the game, there's a version floating around, like a patch that gives you Japanese, the Japanese dub. It gives you the original difficulty and not the unbalanced working designs one that they added, and it's generally just a better experience. And as you may have noticed, as I've just alluded to, sometimes the extra difficulty, or well, most of the time, the extra difficulty is really frustrating to players. And I feel like that's a part of the reason why some of these games sold worse in the West than they did in Japan. It's because the localizers fucked them, because they were instructed to make the games harder, so that, there were more people buying them because they wanted to actually finish the game. And sadly, that's just the way it was for a while. Thankfully, some games, like my personal beloved Panzer Dragoon Saga, weren't affected, but a lot of games had this sort of weird localization stuff. I mean, Resident Evil had it. But yeah, so that's just kind of something which you should keep in mind, because very often games are just harder in some regions, and that's a huge thing to keep in mind. But back to the, promised what I would do thing is, because of all of this, I think that it's kind of fair to not just compare the game once. I think a game needs to be compared properly as, compared to everything around it. Because games don't exist in a vacuum. Spoilers, but they don't. And the truth is, in order for you to get an actually good understanding of how good or bad the game was, you need to sort of take into account a lot of stuff. Way more stuff than I've seen most reviewers talk about. For instance, I think the most relevant to our discussion, in the modern day, would be how does the game perform, if we would ignore everything that the game has to offer in terms of how it was back then, compared to its contemporaries. How does the game stack up today? Because there are a lot of games from back then that are, more difficult to control because of their, primitive control schemes, that are generally just harder to play for new audiences, even if you're used to it. I'm used to tank controls. A lot of people aren't. And it's important to keep in mind that even if a game may have been revolutionary back then, the tank controls will really throw some people off. Similarly to that, there's also the inverse. We need to look at how the game was received, back when it came out. And when we're looking at this, what you specifically want to keep in mind is how the game was received, but not only when it came out, but in the specific 6-month period before and after the game's release on the system that it came out on. This is because when a game comes out on a system, it's also never in a vacuum. It's surrounded by other releases, and what's new on a system will severely impact how well a game has been received. For instance, if we just had, 10 good RPGs release on a system, and an 11th RPG releases, which is still pretty fun, but not as fun, it is not going to be received that well. Now, if you would compare to a game which, an RPG which releases on a system which had, one other RPG on it, it doesn't really matter if the game is the best or, just good, it'll be considered good regardless. Paper Mario is a great example of that. Is Paper Mario, one of the best RPGs of the 5th generation? No. It's still a really fun game, though, and nothing can take that away from it. And I think part of the reason why it's remembered so fondly is because it was one of the first, like, Mario RPGs. Mario RPG itself was great, but it was also more square than it was Mario. Mario RPG was basically like the first RPG that, you know, Nintendo took and they were like, okay, so let's make our RPG. And they did a fucking amazing job. The only, of course, thing that I would like to bring up whenever Mario, you know, Paper Mario is brought up again is a pretty big reason for the game's success was the fact that it had no competition. I mean, what other games were there on, like, the N64 in the West? I mean, you had, like, the Zelda games, sure, but those are action RPGs. You had Tactics Ogre. Sorry, not Tactics Ogre. You had Ogre Battle 64, Let Us Clink Together, and... well, that's kind of it. You didn't have much. You had Quest 64, but that's garbage. Hold on, I see a spider. I'm back. But yeah, like, I've mentioned... okay, so I think I should go back, and now the spider's been dealt with. It was quite huge, it tried to eat the computer whole, you know. But yeah, okay, so... here's the thing. And I totally just didn't have to do something else right after, killing the spider? No. Not at all. But yeah, memes aside. So, the idea is to compare the game against stuff on its system around the time of its release. To compare the game, you know, against things on its system overall. To compare it, you know, in the entire generation of games on, you know, that came out at the same time, and to compare it across the entire generation in general, and then to do the same thing, but in the modern era. And that's really difficult, because you have to take a game and basically score it 5 times, and then you would get to scores like, how influential was this game overall? And that's a very subjective thing. For instance, a lot of stuff is attributed to Mario 64. When I believe that games like Tomb Raider would be, you know, far closer to, you know, the truth. When you look at which games influenced, you know, the rise of 3D gaming, a lot of people mention stuff like Mario 64, but Tomb Raider sold more copies than Mario 64. Granted, there were more games, but, you know, they were on the market arguably for less time than Mario 64 was, so it's actually more surprising that they sold as much as they did. And then you kind of get into the semantics of game sales, where, you know, somebody will argue, well, this actually means the game was less popular because of, like, the ratio of games sold. But realistically, the Tomb Raider series sold more units. More people were interested in Tomb Raider at the time. And it's fine. Your game doesn't have to be number 1, you know? I feel like that's something a lot of people struggle with. It's the sort of number 1 fanboyism, where a lot of people are just kind of used to Nintendo being the retro game company, because no other company bothered to, like, parade its retro stuff around. Like, Sugar and Rockets? Fucking the stuff they, and I guess Exact Ultra, the studio they were before they turned into Sugar and Rockets, you know? Their games are almost never paraded by Sony, even though they own the studio. Like, Jumping Flash was the first console 3D platformer, and It was really fun, and only a little bit psychedelic. But a lot of people just ignore it, because it's Jumping Flash, it's not Mario. Like, similarly, if you look at PC stuff, a lot of people just ignored a lot of PC games when talking about, 3D gaming. Like, for instance, this indie hit, Quake. Like, whenever you talk about, retro games, people are like, oh, why did 3D gaming rise? Mario 64. Let's ignore the actual history. There are a lot of really weird games on, like, a PC. There are only a few real YouTube channels that cover them. But, like, imagine Resident Evil if it was full of, like, really stupid insta-kill puzzles and shitty in every way. That's Alone in the Dark. Except Alone in the Dark came out 4 years earlier. And Resident Evil was almost a first-person game until they played Alone in the Dark and realized, wow, this is incredible. The thing is, Alone in the Dark by itself sucks, Play today, it's kinda shit. The thing is, though, Alone in the Dark is worth a lot more for what it caused than for the game itself. Similarly, I've seen people mention alpha waves, but there's a pretty clear, like, lack of connection between alpha waves and, well, honestly, most other video games. Which is what I'm trying to get at, because it's such an interesting question, because sometimes, some games just, even if they're the first in something, if nobody really, if you make some revolutionary advancement and nobody notices, did you make the advancement? Alpha Waves was like the first 3D platformer. But was it? If basically nobody cared or knew about it? I'd say still yes, but with the context that it's, something nobody heard of. And that would obviously diminish the game's score, especially considering it's not very fun to play. It's just one of those things that I believe would be kind of really difficult to review. So I understand why basically reviewing a game 5 times is something a lot of people consider annoying, and why reviewers don't do it. But if I really wanted to become a reviewer, half the bloody video would be me justifying, like, my scoring methodology. And then you arrive at, how would you score the elements? Because I don't want to give one... First of all, I don't really want to give numbers. I want to give metrics. Measurements, like loose measurements, like, does this game look graphically on par with, games of the time? Because I feel it's worth a lot more than just saying good graphic, 7 out of 10 graphics, 5 out of 10. No. If the game looks on par with the other ones, it's fine. If the game looks worse, it's worse. But it doesn't even have to be worse. Sometimes a game can look worse than other games which release in the same time, but still be really good. Graphics have this weird obsession in the... Like, people are just obsessed with video game graphics for some reason. But, like, there was this one quote from a Ahoy video where he was like, people say graphics don't matter, but every video game I've ever played had them. Which kind of comes to the correct point, which is video game graphics matter in the sense that sometimes games can't really portray what they want to portray. And that's what I believe is the core, of the argument. A game's graphics are bad if it feels like they're limiting the game from reaching what it could, actually reach in a ideal scenario. How does this look? I like it. Because a lot of the time, you know, in the 5th generation, there were some games that were honestly kinda limited by their graphics, and yet still looked good, and other games that felt like they were taking, you know, full advantage of them for their art style. A really basic example of this would be compare something like Final Fantasy to something like, you know, Castlevania. Final Fantasy was trying so hard to be, you know, hyper cinematic, while Castlevania was Castlevania. It's all about the art style, really. And I think that the art style thing is kind of important, but it's also so hard to talk about, because what is an art style? Some people like me really... You know, it kind of gets to art style bias, because I really don't like the, you know, hyper crunchy graphics of the N64. Like, just the pixelate... Sorry, like, not the pixelated, just, like, the blurry smears of pixels are just things that I find gross. But some people really like that, and to them, hearing that I don't like a game because I think it graphically sucks when it's something they like, they'd hate it, and they'd think I'm wrong. So it's kind of like what... Eventually, you get into a discussion of what reviewing is, because one thing that I've noticed is the concept of bias in a review, where whenever somebody disagrees with you, they're biased. Whenever they agree with you, they are unbiased, you know? But the truth is, bias in a review is expected, because the person making the review is a person, and they have their own opinions. The entire reason why you're watching a review is to watch somebody give their thoughts on it. My issue, which has been somewhat solved at IGN, was that for a lot of things, it was unclear who was doing the review. Because sometimes you would have, like, one guy read out a review that somebody else wrote, and it was unclear on who was saying what. And now that it's kind of been mostly fixed, their reviews are better for it. And I'll be honest with you, some of them are pretty decent. Now, of course, issues may still arise from time to time, but, like, that's more personal disagreements and not, like, issues with how IGN is run. Which are also huge differences, right? Like, sometimes you can just not like a direction some company, like, takes its reviews in. You may think that they may be reviewing too much of this, too little of that, but realistically, a lot of the time it's down to personal opinion. And people will argue over what it means to like X or what it means to like Y, but oftentimes people will argue the, you know, game reviews only when they dislike them. Like, you know, whenever IGN reviews a game that people like, and they give it a, you know, that's sort of like the general hardcore gamer crowd likes, and they don't give it a high score, people complain. Whenever they give a game the hardcore gamer crowd doesn't like a high score, it's just kind of endless complaining. I think a really interesting recent example of this was with Brothership. Brothership is not a very good game. It's not a bad Mario game, right? But it's sort of like, I wouldn't call it the sticker style. It's not that bad, but it's not very good. And the issue with it was that when IGN's review came out, where they gave it a 5 out of 10, which was incredibly interesting because IGN had a reputation for a while for never giving big companies bad reviews, after giving companies bad reviews because they started, you know, using more of the scoreboard than just 7, 8, and 9. people got upset again. And it's kind of stupid. Because people for years were angry that IGN never gave a game a low score. And then, when they gave a game a deserving low score, people get mad. Because it's a game they like. And they were obviously hoping they would give something like COD a low review. Which they did for, like, a few of them. I know for, like, Modern Warfare 3. But also, I think COD in general, like, nowadays is complete garbage, so I think IGN made a mistake not giving every single new COD game a 0, but that's my opinion. But yeah, like, at some point you kind of just realize that a lot of this argument, a lot of these arguments, a lot of the discussion is just people being salty that the thing they like isn't given the number that they'd like for it to be given. And once you realize it's that, then, well, you kind of realize it's all kind of bullshit, because that's the real issue with IGN. It's not about, I don't like this about them, I don't like that about them. At the end of the day, people who don't like IGN will use rational arguments, they will try to rationalize their hate, but at the end of the day, it all boils down to, well, my game was not given the score that I want them to give my game. Or, like, a game I hate was given a high score because the reviewer liked it. How dare they? And it does kind of get into the question of something that turned out to be really disgusting, but it's worth bringing up, which was the concept of there being, and for some people, this will give you Vietnam War flashbacks, ethics in game journalism. Because, conceptually, you wanting ethics in journalism is a good idea. But, when the people who were talking about that, like a decade ago now, were saying they wanted that, they didn't want that. They were just angry gamer bros who just wanted an excuse to harass women. If you weren't around back then online, and you don't know what I'm talking about, good. Good. You're not missing much except a bunch of angry man-children screaming and crying about their video games, okay? And also a lot of false allegations that some, like, woman was sleeping with reviewers for her game to be given good reviews. But, yeah, it's just a lot of, like, drama-level shit that was blown, you know, just a lot of bullshit that was blown out of proportion by angry gamers, which, honestly, that era kind of killed the term gamer. Because nowadays, like in the last few years, there's a lot of ironic gamerism, I guess you could call it, where, you know, I'm not a... You see those, like, memes where it's like, I'm not a player, I'm a gamer. Players get chicks, I get bullied at school. And that kind of ironic stuff came out of the fact that, you know, a gamer stopped being a hobby as much as, like, what it became, which was just kind of, you know, people just started avoiding the concept of gamer. That's also when the, like, other gross things started happening, like incels and stuff, roughly. I guess you could say the world started rotting in the 2010s, because that's when a lot of it went to shit. But yeah, generally speaking, yeah, that's... all of it kind of exploded really quickly and nobody noticed. Where so much of it got so bad and awful so quickly, like, we went from... like, we genuinely went from people online arguing how friendly gaming was to women to, like, you know, people being angry at women for playing video games. It was crazy. But there's not much you can really do as an individual, except laugh at the people who are still obsessed. You know? Because it's still happening. You go online now, people... there's this new game, I don't even know what it's called, but it's gonna have a woman in it, but the woman is sexy. So, people were arguing if the game was woke or not, because there was a woman in the game, but the woman was hot. And that kind of shit is just poisoning the gaming landscape. It's why still a lot of people find, a lot of the gaming stuff kind of icky. It's because it's kind of like also why a lot of people avoid multiplayer, why I avoid anything kind of competitive. Recently there was a game called Marathon announced, where they promised not to add voice chat. Now, to me, I think that's good. Because as somebody whose main FPS for many years was TF2, I never really used the voice function. That's mainly because I really didn't see much benefit over hitting like X1, X2, or whatever the command was to do like spy, or like hitting E for medic. And I believe that system is generally, with callouts, is generally better. And it's just quicker, honestly. Like, when you get it down to muscle memory, you can just hit, like, a button combo and call for medic instead of, like, hitting chat and, screaming, medic! Plus, like, you have, like, directionality of the voice so the medic can hear where you are. It's a better system. And a part of the reason why they decided to not use voice chat is because of how much verbal abuse is thrown around basically whenever you, like, use voice chat in a game. And the truth is, I'm fine with that. I am perfectly fine with voice chat being excluded from a game because people are being shitty in it. I think that it's just one of those, I guess you could call it collective punishment things, where that is a war crime, but I think it's fine to collectively punish players until the players start self-policing, because that's the end goal. That's what we want at the end of it, right? We want the gaming community to police itself to a degree where it's not as toxic anymore. That's what we want. And the only way we're going to get that, like, ever, is by, like, showing people that, hey, this is a problem in the community, and game designers are going to try to, incentivize you into, like, making sure that that doesn't happen. Because the truth is, I know a lot of, like, modern-day online politics are about, ooh, look at how brutal and epic I am, look at how mean I am. But that's not how real life works. Like, I guess it technically is, considering, like, how much... Well, in some places in the world, not where I'm at. But the thing is, you're gonna run into a situation where we just kind of need to make, gamers realize they should either, they'll either have to police themselves or have gaming be worse because they're allowing for people, who are shitty to prosper. In a way, I think it's fine. I understand that, like, well, you're making my gaming experience worse because of somebody else? Well, yeah, but that somebody else is making the experience of other players worse as well, so... If anything, we're just making it equal now. Now you are gonna have your experience be made worse just as somebody else's because of that guy. And that's your incentive to want to make that guy stop. Or to do something to make, that less socially acceptable. Because the goal is to, when people say we need to make gaming accessible to everyone, no, it's not about, like, removing difficulty from a Souls game. It's just, like, making the game playable for people who would otherwise get harassed off the game. Which is why I'm eternally thankful that I'm not a woman on the internet. Because holy shit, have you seen what they have to go through? I would never want to fucking deal with that. Like, holy shit. It's messed up. And, you know, there's no solution. That's the issue. There's no solution. The only solution there is to just have people deal with the consequences of them not wanting to deal with the bad actors until they realize it's better to deal with the bad actors. Some people obviously aren't fans of that, but play a different game then. Like, what we want is a friendlier community in gaming. That's the goal. And being friendlier will sometimes require, you know, kicking out the people who are not friendly. And if you're not okay with that, I'm sorry, buddy. You're gonna have to find a new game. Because, realistically, if anything, gaming in the past, like, who knows how many years has gotten more toxic. In some places, it's gotten less toxic, sure. But in a lot of places, it's just gotten worse, and there will never be a solution unless people can actually, you know, do something about it. And the moment somebody tries to do something about it, like, you know, like how they're trying to do it with Marathon, you will see people complain. Because people don't like it when their toys are taken from them. Even if the reason why their toys are taken from them is completely valid. And I get that, but you'll just have to live with it. If, like, so many people have to live with muting the voice chat because, like, if they, you know, use it, they'll get harassed. You know, these people can also then deal with not using the voice chat either. And the response to them basically, like, calling anyone who doesn't like getting harassed in chat, or, like, who doesn't like the idea of people harassing other people in chat a pussy, I think that just speaks volumes to where, like, Marathon was spot on, because the exact people who are mad about the change are the kinds of people who the change was made to piss off. And I think that's fine. I think that's what we should strive for. I think we should strive to make shitty people mad, in hopes that they will realize that the only way to not be mad is to change and become a better person. Because realistically, what else can you do? Hit them over the head with a rock? That's not gonna work. Like, there's nothing in there to jumble when you hit, so yeah. I'll think about turning the thing I talked about earlier into some kind of video for a more comprehensive way of video game analysis. That sounds really pompous though, so maybe I'd have to change the name to something like Karyochi's way of reviewing games unbiasedly with only a medium amount of gamer bias. I don't know. Whatever, we have to, like, reclaim the word gamer, where it's like, you're not a gamer unless you're not cringe. Oh, no, you're not a gamer unless... No, you're only a gamer if you're a little bit cringe, but cringe in not a stupid way. See you next time, goodbye.